Our Westphalian world is over. This world, which was drawn during the 17th century, just after the 30-year war, which took place in Europe. This world order was made of interstate competition, of power competition, of balance of power. It was also made by very few Western states. This world is now over because after the Second World War, we had to face three major turning points. And we have to observe that the main powers, the traditional powers, that's to say the Western powers, were not really able to take properly the bends. What are these major turning points? I would distinguish three major turning points, which are structuring our post-World War history. First, in the long term, globalization. The second factor, the second major turning point is the crisis of the states, which took place in a mid-term. And in a short term, the third major turning point was the collapse of bipolarity. First, globalization. Of course, there is no date for determining when globalization took place in our contemporary history. That's why I mentioned a long-term transformation of our world order. But we know that this globalization totally questioned the Westphalian order for several reasons, at least for 5 reasons. The first one is inclusion. For the first time in the history of humanity, all the states, all the people of the societies of the world are included in the same system. And now at UN, we have 193 members. This is quite different from an international system which was only composed of 10, even 8, maybe 12 states, as it was the case during the 19th century. The second transformation is communication. With the revolution of communication, the new communication technology, now all the individuals are able to communicate with each other. That's to say, territory is defeated as a principle of action. Now territory has not the same meaning it had previously during the Westphalian moment of our history. But it implies a new kind of governance, which is questioning all the traditional principles of the international law and the main structures of the international institutions. Third, globalization implies non-state actors proliferating in our world order. Now the world order is not only depending on states, but also on non-state actors, economic actors, social actors, cultural actors, religious actors, and so on. And these actors are not really integrated in this world. As far as this world is Westphalian, is not able to integrate, to include these new non-state actors. Fourth, sovereignty. Sovereignty is challenged by interdependence. Sovereignty was the fundamental principle of the Westphalian order. Sovereignty is not working in a world of interdependence, in a global world. Sovereignty is questioned by market. Sovereignty is questioned by communication. Sovereignty is challenged by transnational relations. But this new interdependence is not really managed in our present world order. That's why this one is rather unstable. And of course, last point of this globalization is the increasing pressure of the international social issues. Now, traditional political issues are no more the main issue in the international system. The main issues are made of social issues, that's to say, hunger, health, economic development, environment, and so on. This is the first break in our Westphalian order. The second one is related to the midterm, that's to say, the crisis of the state, double crisis of the state. First in the developing countries, but also in the developed countries. Developing countries. We have to take into account that decolonization, which is one of the major events of our contemporary world, was badly run, was not really managed, and was realized through a very dangerous postulate, that's to say it's possible to export the Western state, to import the Western state inside the developing countries. This is not working. That's why so many states in the South are collapsing. That's why there is a proliferation of failed states. This is also a great change. And the other one is the crisis of the state even in the developed countries. Crisis of the welfare state, crisis of the economic functions of the state, crisis of the very notion of security, which is no more working. Ops is probably dead by now. That's why we have to rethink our world order, taking into account new parameters of regulation. But at last, there is a short-term crisis. This short-term crisis is coming from the end of bipolarity. Bipolarity was a clear principle, a clear way of regulation of our international order. In November 9th, in Berlin, when the wall fell down, or maybe in La Valette 1 month later, when Gorbachev met George H. Bush and said to him that USSR is not interested in a competition with Western countries. That was the end of bipolarity. But if bipolarity is no more working, what is now presently our international system? We don't know that. It's currently called post-bipolar system, but we know when we say post-bipolar system that previously we had a bipolar system, but we don't know which kind of systems we're now facing. That's a problem. But the real problem is that with the end of bipolarity, the world had to meet the crisis of the concept of enmity. Where is the enemy? This is probably the main enigma of our post-bipolar world. But it means also that the competition among equals, that's to say among states which have the same level of development, is now over. And if this competition is over, we have now to define new kind of competitions between weak countries or between weak and strong countries. It's quite different from the traditional vision of war. And even alliances are now questioned, like NATO and so many other military alliances. What about this post-bipolar world? Has it substitutes for taking these new functions and these new challenges into account? Or do we observe a kind of attempt to continue to maintain this traditional Westphalian world in a real post-Westphalian moment? This would be a grave contradiction, and this contradiction is probably the main feature of our present international order that we will investigate together.